For the average gym goer, squats and deadlifts are probably just about all they need to develop their lower body. All right, guys, when I make that statement, though, I'm not saying they should never do any accessory work or they should never do weak point training or anything for the lower body. What I'm saying is that for most people, if they train them hard, if they program them correctly, most people can build a pretty strong, pretty impressive lower body almost exclusively off of squatting and deadlifting. And I'll throw some caveats in of things that other people may need. Some people may benefit from some extra posterior chain work. Some people may benefit from some extra hamstring work, calf work, right? So we're not excluding those things. In fact, I'd say most people probably should maybe throw a third exercise in at least. But when people get this idea that you can't fully develop or develop a well-developed lower body off of this, it's just silly. And particularly if you're careful with your deadlift types, you're careful with your selection. So if you watch kind of what I'm doing in these are just from a single workout. This was the core of my training, and then I do a little bit of accessory stuff afterwards. But if you look at what I did from this session, probably going to be a month old by the time this video comes up. You know, I did 3 sets of squats and 3 sets of deadlifts. But notice what I'm doing. I'm doing deep pause squats and I'm doing deficit deadlifts with a stiff bar. And this is kind of the point. We're trying to work as much muscle as we can through long ranges of motion when we do this. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of tension present. So when we really look at this and you look at the data, what all grows from just a normal back squat? Glutes, adductors, quads. And in fact, anyone who says that, oh, squats don't build glutes, I'm sorry, that is not evidence-based. You have no evidence to support that silly statement, and you have evidence to the contrary. So anytime you hear someone say, well, I can't develop glutes from lots of squatting, it's like, well, did you actually bother to load any real weight? Did you put effort into the squat? Did you do challenging limit sets? Did you go to a full range of motion? Because there's what we come down to also, right? If you're jumping up doing some curtsy squats, okay, I get it. But if you're actually going deep, and we look at like the study that was done on normal high bar squats, done as a full squat, the glute development was robust. Glutes and adductors actually grew a little more than the quads. Quads still grew; they were still a primary mover. But you know, the glute development happened. The adductor development absolutely happened, and again, they grew slightly more than the quads did. So again, we need to be clear here. It absolutely does grow glutes, and so it does grow all 3 of these muscles very effectively. If we cared about EMG data at all, which I'm not saying we always should, normal back squats hit the calves. They hit the calves just as hard as a standing calf raise did, at least for EMG purposes. That is not evidence of hypertrophy, but I think we're onto something here. Okay, just saying, when you look at that from an evidence perspective, I mean, all those muscles should be growing from it. They should be growing from it. In addition to the fact that we get all this core work and everything else, right? Your abdominals, erectors, all this stuff are getting worked. They can absolutely grow from this. Same thing we get over to the deadlift. You know, you'll get people, well, and it's funny, I'll see people who are like, well, I didn't build a massive posterior chain when I have my deadlifts, respectively, and they're pulling on a sumo on a whippy bar with straps and all sorts of things. Come on. Of course, because you didn't put as much tension on there. Get over and do a normal conventional deadlift. Okay? Do normal conventional deadlifts. Both the limited hypertrophy data we have on it, there's only been, I think, 1 major study comparing it to other stuff. The deadlift is a monster for hypertrophy. A regular conventional deadlift is absolutely a monster for hypertrophy. You go off of, again, you look at any muscle activation, the same thing, the muscle activation's off the charts. Again, pointing out muscle activation is not evidence of hypertrophy. But I mean, sure, we could talk about lengthened position on an RDL is probably better on the hamstrings. Okay, and that's a reasonable assumption. So you might say, well, an RDL instead of a deadlift, because an RDL is not a deadlift. Romanian deadlifts, even though the word deadlift's in the name, it's not a deadlift by It's just a hip hinge. So why we called it an RDL is kind of funny, because it's not a deadlift. We could argue biomechanically it possibly hits the hamstrings harder. The problem is we don't have hypertrophy data or even EMG or anything to actually show that, so just be aware of that. We don't have proof of it. It's a good, reasonable assumption. And I think it is a reasonable assumption. It's perfectly fair when you look at the biomechanics. But is it going to be a significant difference in hypertrophy? I don't know about that. Again, I would say it's very possible it is, and it's actually quite likely that it is. The evidence isn't there. Does that make sense? But for everything else, the normal conventional deadlift is still going to be bigger. The hamstrings is the only one you can debate. Only one you can debate versus something like an RDL. But you look at the glute activation, even the hamstring activation, erectors, traps, forearms, all the stuff. You can even build quads a bit off of deadlifts. Not as good as a squat, which is why the squat is the king of building size, because the quads are the biggest muscle in the body, proven in multiple studies, and they do get more activation on this than the deadlift. But the deadlift will just get you thick all the way around. All right? So I would say for most people, for your base building, it makes sense to use these. Plus, we have tons and tons and tons of coaching data. We know how to do them safely. We know how to do them efficiently. We know from them being some of the most popular lifts in the world for strength purposes due to powerlifting and stuff, we know how to program them to get great progression. We know how to program them to get low injuries, to do them safely. All right? There's so much coaching data available that it makes sense to use them, even if other factors were equal. So that gives them a big advantage. Now, after all that's said and done, if your calves are still lagging, do some calf raises. If you're worried about your erectors not being strong enough to handle those, some reverse hypers would be a good idea. Or if you need more posterior chain, some good mornings, or even hamstring curls, fine. Those are all good exercises. I program all those exercises. But keeping in mind, those are icing on the cake. Do we understand that? Those are icing on the cake. You can build a tremendously jacked lower body off of squats and deadlifts alone, and there will be carryover to your upper body. Okay? They will still help thicken you up top. They're not going to build great biceps or great pecs or any of that, but they'll thicken a lot of muscles up in your upper body also. So they bring a ton to the table overall. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.